It's my honor and pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Dan Reicher, Director of Climate Change Energy Initiatives at Google.org. Mr. Reicher holds a BA degree in biology from Dartmouth College and a JD degree from Stanford Law School. He has been an active environmentalist since he was 7 years old, when he got a company to stop production of parka with a hood lined with the fur of a wolverine that was endangered. Quote, "Gee, that was easy," he said. When he graduated with his bachelor's degree, he participated in the first expedition to kayak all 1,888 miles of the Rio Grande, a trip sponsored by National Geographic. And later, he was part of the first group on record to kayak the Yangtze River in China. I wish I could join him. Prior to his current position at Google.org, Mr. Reicher was president and co-founder of New Energy Capital Group Corporation, a company that develops and manages renewable energy and distributed generation projects. He's also a member of General Electric's Eco-Imagination Advisory Board. In 2008, Mr. Reicher worked for Clean Technology Agenda for President Obama, a group that raised about $2 million for the Obama campaign. He also was a key advisor for President Obama on issues related to energy. From 1997 to 2001, and under Mr. President Clinton administration, Mr. Reicher was Assistant Secretary of Energy for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the Department of Energy. After leaving the Clinton administration in 2001, he was a consultant to the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee and a visiting fellow at the World Resources Institute. Now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Dan Reicher, Director of Climate Change and Energy Initiatives at Google.org.
Very, very pleased to be here today and tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Google on clean energy and climate change, and hopefully give you a broader perspective of what I think it takes, what we think it takes to get to a clean energy future. And I'm going to range broadly. I'll talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then I will be happy to take your questions, your comments, any good jokes you have, whatever you got. So with that, let's get going. I've always loved this. The future is not what it used to be. You know, you think about what we're looking at today in terms of economy, security, environment, and this is quite a different moment, quite a pivotal moment. And I also like this: the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And I think that's what's so exciting when it comes to the world of clean energy, is in fact we can invent the future. Engineers, policy people, investors together can really build a new energy economy, and we can get all the resulting benefits in terms of environment, economy, and security. So the first question I always get is, you know, why Google? What's Google got to do with energy? And there's a variety of reasons. One, turns out those instantaneous searches that everybody has come to rely on, there's a fair amount of electricity behind those in the data centers all over the country and all over the world. So early on, the engineers at Google said, you know, we've got to get on top of this. Let's use this electricity as efficiently as we can, and let's green up that supply as much as we can. Broadly, very committed to building a clean energy future. We've got engineers who frankly come to work and want to tackle these kinds of energy and climate challenges, we believe deeply, deeply that there is inadequate investment in R&D when it comes to clean energy. And we think that some of our products may actually be helpful in building this clean energy future. So Google comes to this for a whole variety of reasons. One of the things we did a couple of years ago was just ask ourselves, if you really push this system, where could we be by 2030? You know, how big a chunk of our energy economy could come from renewables? How much could we press demand down through aggressive efficiency? And we looked at a variety of scenarios. This is just a quick snapshot, but as you see, we think there's ways to wean ourselves very significantly from fossil fuels. They will continue to play a role, and to incorporate into our energy system dramatically more renewables while we bend that demand curve down through efficiency in a very aggressive way. We call this Google Clean Energy 2030. As I said, it came out a couple of years ago. From an economic standpoint, this is an extraordinary opportunity. I'm always humbled by this number. The world will have to invest more than $26 trillion in energy infrastructure to meet currently projected demand between now and 2030. $26 trillion. We've gotten pretty good at measuring billions. How you measure trillions is quite something. So just the economic scope here is quite extraordinary, and I think it gives people a lot of motivation, frankly, to get on top of this challenge and indeed this very massive opportunity. One of those big areas, something that where we sit today here in San Jose, here in Silicon Valley, that we're particularly interested in is tomorrow's smart grid. How do you start with cleaner energy sources, move them through advanced transmission and distribution systems, get them into smarter homes, radically increase the number of vehicles that plug into the electric grid and drive based on electricity? How do you pull all that together? We think that's a very exciting opportunity and one we and lots of others are focused on. But I have to say, we got a long, long, long way to go. If Thomas Edison were to come back today, he would not only recognize large parts of the U.S. electric grid, but there are still parts operating that he had a hand in building. So we're way away from this hoped-for world of the smart grid. But on the other hand, it's a very exciting future that I think nicely links information software and energy hardware, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So there's one slide at a general level to take away from today's talk. It's this one. I am very convinced that if we are going to get to this sustainable energy future in our own country and indeed globally, it's really going to take three things arrayed on this triangle. We've got to radically improve the technologies. That's where you as engineers come in. We've got to put much smarter policies in place at all levels, local, state, federal, and internationally. And there's got to be a massive infusion of capital to make all this happen. And we've got to get good at all 3 points of this triangle. We've got to have people who understand all 3 points of this triangle. And I would tell you as students, it's a great thing to get good and go deep in one discipline. For many of you, it's engineering. But it's also good to look broadly. Get an understanding of the policy world and how that will impact what you're working on in engineering. Get at least a little bit of an understanding of the investment world and how that will affect what you're trying to do in the engineering world. We've all got to get more versatile in moving around this clean energy triangle. So where do we start? I think the easy place to start is with energy efficiency. I love what Amory Lovins has said. Amory Lovins, one of the early pioneers in clean energy, said all people want is cold beer and hot showers. What that means is people simply want the energy services. If we can do it, if we can provide those services with a lot less energy, we're all the better off for it. And I think the wonderful thing is that energy efficiency is, in fact, the low-cost option. This is the McKinsey study came out recently that looked at the costs of various energy technologies. And what you'll see, negative cost on the left, are the energy efficiency opportunities, from very boring things like putting insulation in buildings, to more fuel-efficient vehicles, to more efficient lighting and air conditioning systems, water heating. We call this the low-hanging fruit. And, not surprisingly, low-hanging fruit grows back. So the incandescent light bulb that we are replacing today with the compact fluorescent light bulb, we're going to replace again with the LED light bulb. Technology moves on. These low-cost opportunities continue to present themselves. We don't use up the energy efficiency opportunities. Meanwhile, those higher cost options on the supply side, solar, wind, waste to energy, all of those we continue to need to focus on. But what we can do today at very low cost is take advantage of efficiency. One of those great examples is the boring world of the home refrigerator. The average refrigerator in the early 1970s used, on average, almost 2,000 kilowatt hours a year to power it. You cannot, by law today, sell a refrigerator that uses more than 450 kilowatt hours a year. Federal requirements mandate that. And coming down this cost curve has been improvements in the technology itself, several policy steps, in particular federal and state standards, and making it easier for people to finance these kinds of appliances in their home. So again, policy, technology, and finance coming together. I had a great moment. We were issuing new standards in the Clinton administration for refrigerators, and the Secretary of Energy at the time, Bill Richardson, the governor of Arizona, the governor of New Mexico today, he was then the Energy Secretary, and he came up to me before he was getting up on stage, and he said, Reicher, what should I get up and say? And I said, well, Mr. Secretary, last week President Clinton made a speech about, his second inaugural speech about building a bridge to the 21st century. That was the theme of his speech. Why don't you announce we're building a fridge to the 21st century? It was the quote of the week in Newsweek. It made the New York Times. It was my greatest moment as a punster, so maybe my greatest moment as a bureaucrat. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. So, more seriously, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. This is another aspect of what we're focused on at Google. What's the problem? And the problem today is most people just get this monthly energy bill. It's this thing that comes in the mail. It's often many pages. It's very complicated. It's not very accessible. It's not very useful. And in many places, that's all people get. And when they can get it online, even that doesn't work very well. So imagine going into a supermarket and there were no prices on anything. You just put stuff in the cart, and at the end of your shopping experience, they said your bill is $231.15, pay here. That's pretty much how we buy energy today in our homes. People wouldn't stand for that in the grocery store. They want to know what things cost. They want to do comparison shopping. They want some information. But we don't do that today in large measure when it comes to buying energy for our homes and businesses. So most people have no clue how much energy they use each day, or what appliances use the most energy, or what time of the day they use the most energy, or what have they spent today, over the month, over the year. And if we're going to make improvements in energy efficiency, we think at Google getting people this kind of information could make a big, big difference. We call it ET, Energy Technology meets IT, Information Technology. And it's where the boring old room air conditioner meets information software and what you can do with that. So what are we working on at Google? Well, one of those areas is, in fact, some technology that would help people get at this problem and get at the same time, this opportunity. And it's all about energy information. We think simply giving people better information, as close as possible to real-time information, you can get simple behavioral changes made. If people have a better understanding because they see what they're using at any given moment, we can see a 5 to 15% savings simply based on behavioral changes. People realizing that they left all the lights on in the basement and turning them off. Simple things like that. If you take the next step, People discover, as I did when I moved to California, that I had a 30-year-old refrigerator in my house that was using more than 2,000 kilowatt hours a year. It became very obvious to me when I had this kind of detailed information that the first thing I should do in this house is go out and replace the refrigerator. And I did, and it made a dramatic improvement. So actual improvements to the house on top of these behavioral changes. And then who knows what you can do when the appliances in your home start talking to the electric grid. What kind of additional savings and what kind of additional improvements come with that? You know, for example, really doesn't matter when you run the dishwasher as long as the dishes are clean the next morning. Suppose you had a smart dishwasher that was talking to the electric grid, and the electric grid says, you know what? It's very hot out. The electric grid is very strained right now. We'd rather not have you, dishwasher, turn on at 6 o'clock on a hot day when it's 100 degrees out. We'd prefer if you turned on at midnight. And by the way, your electricity will cost 50% less. A smart, simple appliance like a dishwasher talking to the electric grid, you having decided that you were willing to enter into this simply by checking a box on a form months before, those sorts of things can happen. Every one of the appliances in your home, as they become smarter, as they become chip-enabled, can begin to have those kinds of conversations to both shift electricity use and, in many cases, to reduce it as well. So those three elements are this path to energy saving. At Google, we've developed something called Google Powermeter, which is beginning to give people this kind of information. You find it on the iGoogle homepage, where people go many times a day to find out what the weather is or what sports scores are or how stocks are doing. And there, if you choose, one can find what's happening in terms of electricity use in your home and how you compare to others, a similarly sized home, and a whole host of things that can go from there. How it works. This is a piece of software that talks to you on the iGoogle homepage, either through a smart electric meter that a utility has installed in your home and is enabled to be able to talk through this software to you, or you've clipped on a simple device onto something like your fuse box that can do something similar and talk through this software to you and give you this kind of information. So, and these are devices that increasingly you're going to go buy at a Home Depot or a Walmart for very little money, and it will allow these kinds of conversations to go on and get information in real time or near real time on your laptop. Meanwhile, as you begin to bring smart appliances into the home, it will have more detailed conversations with those as well, along the lines of what I talked about before. We have a variety of partners that we're beginning to pilot this with. These are some utilities around the country and around the world. These are some device makers. One is called the Energy Detective up in the upper right, or TED. So utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric, you see on the bottom line, that's one of the larger ones. So we're trying this out. Itron is the builder of smart meters, one of the larger companies in that business. They're a partner. So we're trying this out with various people to see how it works. And let me say, Google is not the only company interested in this area where software and hardware and energy information meet. This is of keen interest to lots of companies. But we're seeing what we can do in this space using some of the skills and using this iGoogle homepage platform that we've got. So what does it mean? You know, we're going out and talking to people who have tried it out and you know, began using Google Powermeter yesterday, decided it's time to buy a more efficient clothes dryer today. One of my colleagues who lives in a little apartment in San Francisco kept seeing these big spikes on his energy bill, and that had nothing to do with his apartment. He discovered he was paying for the washers and dryers in the basement. So whenever anyone went in to wash or dry their clothes, it was going on his bill. Lots and lots of stories from people like that, just discovering things. As I said, I discovered this refrigerator, and I didn't quite understand how much electricity it was drawing and what we were paying for it. So that's the story of home energy information. I want to shift now to the world of automobiles. And this is energy security. This is economics. This is environment. You know, vehicles obviously play big in all three of those areas, and the decisions we make about vehicles in this country and around the world are going to be very pivotal. This one has special meaning for me, this sign, when I saw it, because believe it or not, we delivered our third child in the front seat of a Volvo on a cold day in Vermont at a Shell station. And I took this home and showed it to my wife. She cringed. And our son, who's now 7, his nickname is Carson. Sorry about that. Anyway, so we have a project at Google called Recharge It. Essentially, a few years ago, we bought 8 Toyota Priuses and a couple of Ford Escapes, both of those vehicles hybrid gas-electric vehicles, and converted them to be plug-in cars. There's a shop in San Francisco that will do these aftermarket conversions of these kinds of cars so that they turn into plug-in vehicles. Much larger battery and a whole host of things that allow them to be plug-ins. And we've been doing various things with those vehicles ever since. So in the technology area, this is what they look like. They sit under a solar charging station at the Google campus. We have a very large set of solar panels that cover 8 buildings and a whole host of these parking structures across the campus. And on a sunny day, you bring the car in and you can plug it in, and you're charging it with solar electricity. These cars are used by Google employees in their regular business rounds in Silicon Valley, and we've been collecting a lot of data about how they've done over time. As I said, a larger battery, lithium-ion batteries, and there's the data collection system that each car has. And the results have been very impressive. And before I describe those results, let me say Google employees turn out not to be very representative drivers for all sorts of reasons. So what we did was we actually went out and hired professional drivers, and each one of those drivers drove each one of these cars for 2,000 miles to accurately simulate what an average American driver, as opposed to a Google driver, would really do with these kinds of cars. And this is the data that came back, which is the Toyota Prius getting over 90 miles per gallon, the Toyota Prius plug-in versus the regular Toyota Prius at about 48, and the Ford Escape plug-in at almost 50 miles per gallon versus a regular Ford Escape hybrid at 32 miles per gallon. So big improvements in terms of fuel economy. And I think that this kind of data coming a couple of years ago was useful in the national debate about how much should we be pushing these kinds of plug-in vehicles, how much money should the federal government be spending to advance their deployment, to accelerate their use. The stimulus bill that Congress adopted a couple of years ago has quite a bit of money in it to try to accelerate the deployment of these. And this data, we think, may have played at least a modest role in that debate. We've gone on from there to do a little bit more. We've asked ourselves, what could you do if there were large numbers of these vehicles? One of the issues with renewable electricity, as many of you know, is that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So it's harder to integrate solar and wind in large quantities into the electric grid than something that is, quote, base load like coal. And so we asked ourselves, well, what if you had large numbers of plug-in vehicles, and what if you had a smart grid, and as the wind went up, charging of these vehicles went down, and as the wind went down, charging of these vehicles, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. As the wind went up, no, what do I mean? As the wind went up, charging of these vehicles would go forward, and as the wind went down, you could back them off. And similarly, these could be sources, this could be a place at night to store this electricity. One of the characteristics of wind in California is we tend to see more blowing at night during the day when we least need it. And imagine if you had millions of these vehicles ready to be charged. They represent a large storage opportunity. So we began to do some experiments with how you could turn these cars on and off in terms of their charging based on signals received from the electric grid. For example, about the state of the wind resource at any given moment. Got some good data on that with a limited number of cars. And went on to do some further analysis of what you could do in an individual vehicle, how best to monitor it, how best to control it. Just pilot projects, but beginning to ask this question about how could these vehicles, beyond their fuel economy advantages, help you better manage the rising presence of these intermittent renewable sources in the electric grid. And so we, again, with lots of other people, are looking at that as an opportunity, another advantage of these kinds of vehicles being integrated into our electric grid. I drove the Chevy Volt recently, which will come out in November. It's a very exciting car. It's a hybrid gas-electric plug-in. It will go roughly 50 miles on a charge. And then there's 7 or 8 gallons of gasoline in the tank, so you can go another 300 or 400 miles. So I think it's going to be attractive to people. It comes with about an $8,000 federal subsidy. So the $40,000 price tag will end up about $32,000, and it uses the Chevy OnStar system, the software, so it can be talking to the electric grid in various ways. So it's got a lot of interesting features. Nissan is also coming out with the Leaf, an all-electric car, around the same period of time. So I think there's going to be a very healthy race going on among the big manufacturers, to say nothing of the smaller manufacturers, some of whom are in this valley. So that's kind of the world of energy efficiency in terms of buildings and fuel economy in terms of vehicles, and a little bit about what we're doing at Google. We're also very interested in renewable electricity, and we've launched an initiative a couple of years ago called RE less than C, renewable electricity cheaper than coal. And it represented a recognition that lots of people have, which is, looked at today, renewable electricity is pretty expensive compared with what we mostly rely on today, which is coal and natural gas in this country and around the world. If coal in this country is on the order of 4, 5, 6 cents, photovoltaics are several times that, and wind is a decent multiple of that as well. And you look at, in China, for example, what they're delivering pulverized coal at, it's even cheaper. But I did stick down there U.S. efficiency. Remember, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the cheap stuff. That's the stuff that'll compete today. So again, we have a balanced program. How do you promote this low-cost technology and opportunity? Meanwhile, how do you bring these higher-cost renewable electricity technologies down the cost curve? How do you accelerate reducing their costs over the next 5 or 10 years? So we're doing a variety of things. We're doing some R&D at Google. We have some engineers actually working on how you could take some of the costs out of the large solar thermal projects, the big mirror-based systems that you see in the desert. What could you do to drop those costs? We funded some external R&D. We're working on some policy barriers that in this area, and we're beginning to invest in both breakthrough technologies and in projects that deploy advanced technologies. So in the technology area, I said we're looking at how you take the cost out of these large solar thermal systems. This is one in the Mojave Desert. And we've invested in the company, and at the same time are also doing some engineering work at Google on that. Interested in how you can get at the higher value wind up beyond the height of the normal wind turbine, and actually have put money into a company that uses essentially a kite-based system, can go up higher into the atmosphere and can send this electricity down to the ground and take advantage of it. it's a technology that has a long distance to go. But if you could get at that much higher value resource, where the wind blows harder for longer periods of the day, you could increase the so-called capacity factor of wind significantly. And then we're also interested in something called enhanced geothermal systems. Traditional geothermal, as many of you know, is where you drill into rock where there's already a pocket of steam or hot water. You bring that heat up, you boil water and make electricity. Well, it turns out if you can drill deep lots of places, you can get to hot rock. There may not be water there, but if you can fracture that rock, put water down there, bring it back up, you could, in theory, radically expand the areas of the world where you could be making electricity from geothermal. And that's called EGS, Enhanced Geothermal Systems. It used to be called hot, dry rock in the old days. So in the concentrating solar power, we're looking at both the engines themselves, how you use systems that don't rely on water, dry systems, and we're focusing on the mirrors as well. In EGS, our cost trajectory there is to take it down to less than 4 cents a kilowatt hour with very large projects as big as 500 megawatts. And with that, there may be potential as well to sequester carbon dioxide from a climate perspective. So there may be an interesting adder to that. Same time, lots and lots of risks around this technology. So we and many others are just at the beginning of looking at EGS and where you can take it. Let me quickly tell you about the EGS resource. We measure it in terms of the depth to that resource. What you can do at 3.5 kilometers is you could be looking at tens of thousands of megawatts that could be potentially developed in the U.S., especially in the western U.S. At 6.5 kilometers, you could be looking at hundreds of thousands of megawatts. And at 10 kilometers, you could unlock energy virtually across the entire U.S. And those are not depths that the traditional fossil industry is unfamiliar with. We do drill and fracture rock and do various things at those depths. So this says maybe we could do the same in unlocking the heat in these hot, dry rock systems. So Texas is an interesting example. The total installed generating base of Texas is about 100,000 megawatts. If you recovered 2% of that resource between 0 and 10 kilometers, you'd be looking at 177,000 megawatts. So there's potentially, and I emphasize potentially, we've got a long way to go, but there's a vast resource in a state like Texas. But even a place like New York, if you can go down to those depths, fracture the rock, 2% recovery there, you could be at a quarter of today's installed base of electrical generating capacity in that state. And if you could recover 20% of it, you could be at 100,000 megawatts. So big opportunity that we think is very intriguing. There's quite a bit of federal money now flowing into this as a result of the stimulus bill. There's a fair amount of activity in the private sector, venture capital-backed companies exploring this. So stay tuned. So finance. Let me quickly talk to you about this broad area of finance and what needs to happen. We at Google have made investments in a series of clean energy technology companies across a whole variety of technology areas, from concentrating solar power, I mentioned the high capacity factor wind, plug-in vehicles, smart grid, and EGS. We're convinced that these are companies with promising technologies, but of course they're venture investments and you never know how they're actually going to do, but these have a decent shot at doing something quite significant. Potter Drilling is one of them. They've developed a way to drill to great depths without a typical bit, instead using heat. Essentially, as someone said, run a jet engine in reverse and melt your way down through the rock. Something like this could be developed. You could get down to these great depths a lot more cheaply than we can today. And project investments. It's one thing to invest in energy technologies, early stage. What we also need to be doing as the private sector and the public sector is investing in the larger projects. So Google, we've begun to put money to work in wind projects, for example, in the Dakotas. A variety of other technologies that are ready to be deployed today show that they work at large scale and go from there. So then lastly is the policy area, an area that I'm very interested in, and during my time in Washington spent a lot of time on and continue to do some work there. As we like to say, the dog finally caught the car. And what do I mean by that? Well, the stimulus bill, which Congress passed a couple of years ago, put unprecedented amounts of money into clean energy, more than we'd ever seen before. I served on the Obama transition team, and it was very, very exciting to work on that stimulus bill. We proposed it to Congress, and Congress adopted more than $50 billion to be put into some of these key areas that we've been talking about today. Smart grid, energy efficiency, hybrid vehicles, weatherization, that's low-income home weatherization, advanced nuclear technologies. And it has to be spent quickly, on the order of a couple of years, and those stimulus funds will run out soon. So they've been put to work in a whole variety of ways that we think could show real progress. And they've also leveraged quite a bit of private sector money as well. We've made some progress, and I emphasize just some, when it comes to comprehensive legislation in Congress. In particular, a comprehensive energy and climate bill. The U.S. House of Representatives did adopt a comprehensive energy and climate bill. It would set limits on greenhouse gas emissions. It would back a whole host of energy programs that we need to get on top of in the federal government. Would create a lot of jobs. So the House of Representatives did its job on this. The problem is the U.S. Senate is very much stalled. An announcement was made not too long ago that the Senate would not proceed with climate legislation. There remains some hope that in the absence of the so-called cap-and-trade legislation, the Senate might still do some work on energy legislation, still might put some things into effect. So there's a healthy debate going on about that, and we're hoping that before the new Congress comes in, we might actually see some energy legislation adopted. We've got 3 focus areas at Google. One is creating an entity called the Clean Energy Deployment Administration. One of the big problems with energy technologies is we can take them to the pilot stage and the demonstration stage. Venture capital money is good at that. Federal R&D money is good at that. The problem is, though, how you scale it up. How do you go from something that cost you maybe $10 or $20, $30 million to build? How do you get the first $500 million or billion-dollar plant built, commercial scale, and demonstrate to investors that this thing works, and they ought to put money into it? We call this the valley of death. So many energy technologies die in that valley of death. And the Clean Energy Deployment Administration would exist, would be created to deal in particular with that problem of scaling energy technologies from the pilot stage to full commercial scale. Get plants number 1 and number 2 built, full commercial scale. After that, the regular energy project investment world will take over, and they'll finance plants 3 through 1,000. It's those first couple that we're really struggling with. We're very interested in federal legislation that would establish a consumer right to know your own home electricity information, a right to know, which some people arguably don't have today, to know how much electricity you're using in your home in real time or near real time in a way that's accessible. So there's a piece of legislation called the E-KNOW, little e, capital K-N-O-W legislation that's pending in Congress right now. And we also think that we've got to dramatically scale up federal RD&D spending from what we spend today on energy, which is roughly $3 to $4 billion, to something a lot closer to $15 to $30 billion a year that President Obama has called for. Let me wrap up so there'll be some time for questions. One of our problems, I love this quote. I've wondered at times what the 10 Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through the U.S. Congress. One of our challenges is, can we get this Congress to act? Can we get it to step up? First, pass some straightforward energy legislation of the sort that I've been talking about. And second, put a serious cap on carbon emissions through a cap-and-trade bill, through a carbon tax. There's any number of mechanisms that have been proposed. We need to do both of those things at that policy point in the triangle, if we're going to drive these technologies forward, if we're going to see the infusion of capital that we really need to see to get to a more sustainable energy economy. I will say finally that the Chinese have figured this out. There was a major front page story in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago that laid out in great detail how much money is flowing in China towards clean energy, large-scale projects that are being backed, whole new manufacturing facilities that are getting built. We in the United States, and to some extent in the European Union as well, are really run the risk of losing this clean energy technology race. And I think we've got to step up to this more so there is a healthy, competitive scene globally for who's going to really bring home the benefits, particularly the job benefits. We're still very good in this country at developing the technologies. We're not as good at capitalizing on those, putting people to work, building large-scale commercial facilities, really taking advantage of what comes with scaling up these technologies. It's a good thing that the Chinese are moving forward. Lots of good things are happening. It's a good thing that the EU is moving forward, but I think we ought to be moving forward to take advantage of the brain power we've gotten in this country that's good at developing technologies, but at least at this point, not as good at deploying them in significant scale and taking the resulting economic, security, and environmental benefits. So thank you very much.
I didn't hear you talk about the Bloombox. That I heard that Google had given some money to fund it and it has one of your servers operating from it. Can you talk about that and its energy efficiency?
I can't say very much because I don't know a great deal. It's been tested at Google. It's a fuel cell system. And we've tried it out, and there's some beginning to collect some data, but I don't know a great deal, so I won't do it any justice today.
The other one is the hot dry rock, which I've always been really keen on, but in light of what's going on, especially back east with the fracking for natural gas, might we run into similar problems with that one?
It's a great question. Fracking is what the natural gas industry is increasingly doing in shale formations, particularly back east. Turns out there's lots of gas, natural gas in these shale formations. The way to get at them is, in fact, to drill down and frack. Crack is, fracture is fracking this rock and pull this natural gas out. There are some issues with that. And there's chemicals that go down there. There's concern about contamination of water supplies. I think the jury is still out. I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other on that. But what we're talking about in geothermal also is fracking rock, fracturing it. There are some differences. We're not putting chemicals down there. Essentially what we're trying to release is heat, not natural gas. But it's a fair question. We're going to have to move forward very carefully, whatever it is we're fracturing underground, natural gas formations or hot rock. We think that the hot rock is very promising. There is another issue whenever you're fracturing rock as well, and that is what's called induced seismicity, cause earthquakes. So there's some data that shows you can set off modest earthquakes in some settings, so we have to be conscious of that as well. In terms of nuclear, I served as a low-level staffer on the President's Commission, President Carter's Commission on the accident at 3 Mile Island, so I kind of go fairly far back in that whole industry. And it's 20% of U.S. electricity. I think there is a new generation of nuclear technologies that are promising. And I think we're going to see increasing investment. We are seeing increasing investment in nuclear today. So I think it's got a piece of this energy future. Like all energy technologies, it has its own set of challenges, one of which is what do we do with the nuclear waste. The second of which is the degree to which you can lose public support in the event of an accident. That's what happened with 3 Mile Island and then Chernobyl after it. And I think we have to be very mindful of this technology, like many others, and losing public support. But I do think it has a good future. There's quite a bit of money in the stimulus package that's headed towards nuclear. The Chinese are moving aggressively. I think we'll see a few new plants built here in the U.S. So it's part of the package.
Yeah, I had a question about electric cars. I know that Tesla was hugely successful in making a car that could go more than 30 miles an hour that was electric, but it was also hugely unsuccessful because it was unreliable and impractical because it broke down a lot, and you could drive for like 100 miles like to and from San Jose State, and then you'd have to recharge it for 12 hours. So I'm just wondering, should we be concerned, and are you guys trying to invent an electric technology that will be more reliable?
So I don't have any specific information about Tesla's challenges, but what I will say is I think these electric cars, the technology, whether they're the pure electric or the hybrid gas-electric plug-ins, they improve by the day. And I think the fact that you're going to see Chevrolet and Nissan coming to market in a very serious way with plug-in vehicles, I think speaks to the future these cars have. They've been through, in both companies and many others, significant reliability testing. I think it'll be an interesting race. Nissan, again, is an all-electric vehicle. We'll see what the public reaction to that is. The Chevrolet, again, is a combined electric and gas vehicle that you can plug in. We'll see the public reaction to that. But I'm quite confident that reliability issues around these plug-in vehicles are being dealt with well, and I think a couple of years from now, these will be very mainstream vehicles, and the question at that point is, how many will be selling a year? And if there are large numbers of them, how do we make sure we successfully integrate them into the grid in some of the ways that I talked about?
Yeah, with this new wave of Republicans trying to come back and take over the House and Senate, shame on you, all you Republicans in here, if there are any of you.
Where are you?
Raise your hands.
Oh!
Not too many, all right.
No, I wasn't asking Republicans. Where's the speaker? I don't want to know Democrats versus Republicans. I have no interest in that. I want to know, okay, good, I can look at you now.
With the concern over the movement over less government and lower taxes, and the possibility of the Republicans taking back over the House and Senate, is there going to be a problem here with legislation being a concern over the next 5 to 10 years with the movement of the energy?
So Congress is a tricky place. We've had real challenges over the last few years in getting, as I said, energy and climate legislation adopted. There clearly is more of an emphasis among Democrats than Republicans typically in getting legislation like this adopted. So as I think a factual matter, if one or both houses of Congress were to switch to Republican control, the likelihood of comprehensive climate and energy legislation will go down. So yes, I think that's a challenge. At the same time, there's a long history within the Republican Party, going back to somebody like Nelson Rockefeller, of support for environment and conservation, and there are members like that in Congress today. So I think there's some hope that even if Congress were to move more in a Republican direction, we still could see some progress. And I think the best argument is just U.S. jobs, U.S. competitiveness, U.S. technology base. We need to move forward with these clean energy technologies for economic and security reasons. Even if you're somehow a doubter about climate change, which always surprises me. I think the science of climate change is pretty well established. But even if you're a doubter, there's so many good security and economic reasons to be moving forward with these clean energy technologies, whatever your political party. I think if Congress does change hands, or if there's a significant move in the Republican direction, I remain hopeful that we can make a strong case and continue. Otherwise, we're going to get beat big time by competitors around the world.
Over here. My name is Julia Ritchie. I'm a field associate with Environment California, and we're here on campus mobilizing thousands of San Jose State students to get out and vote no on Prop 23 40 days from now on November 2nd. And I know that Google is has signed on to our business coalition and one of our big champions on this. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the gravity of the decision that California voters are going to make 40 days from now on Prop 23.
So Prop 23, for those who don't know it, is a proposition that would essentially roll back California's path-breaking climate legislation, which was adopted several years ago and is known as AB 32. I'm told it's just a coincidence that the proposition number to roll this back is the opposite, 23. More seriously, I think it's a huge, huge threat. If this state, if its voters were to roll back this legislation, essentially undo the climate and energy law that this state adopted several years ago, and basically throw up our hands here in this state and say, we're not moving forward to address our climate problems, I think it's a huge problem from an environmental perspective. I think it's a huge problem from an economic perspective and a security perspective. We would basically, from an economic perspective, be saying, you know, this great opportunity to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs in this state around clean technology, we just don't care about that if we were to roll back this law. The security that this brings us, more development of domestic energy sources, clean domestic energy sources, I think we'd be throwing that out as well. And we'd be sending a signal to the rest of the country and indeed to Washington that if California can't protect its own climate legislation, it's hard to imagine convincing Congress to adopt national legislation. So I'm hopeful that California voters, when they turn out, will vote no on Proposition 23, and that we will continue to move forward to be the leaders that California has long been when it comes to clean energy and dealing with climate. Can you speak up?
I have a pretty quick question. So I heard a myth that if you spend a couple of minutes doing searches on Google, it's as spending as much energy as boiling a kettle of tea. Is this true?
You know, I don't know that statistic. I should, and I don't. I can tell you that the ability to get access to this kinds of information and what it avoids is a real energy saving opportunity. You think about the delivery of the morning newspaper. In many places it gets driven around in a car or truck and dropped off at your house. The energy intensity of that versus being able to simply go online when you wake up and take a look at any newspaper you want all over the country and all over the world. I think net, this kind of access to information that Google and other companies provides can be a big energy saver. And if we go on and apply this information technology in the way I was talking about, smart appliances, smart cars, I think the sky's the limit when it comes to what we can do to help people save energy.
Yeah, I have a question. So regarding the hybrid cars, how is the plug-in hybrid able to get 93 miles per gallon? The plug-in hybrid.
How is it able to?
Yeah.
Again, hired a professional driver who took these cars, drove 2,000 miles simulating what an average American driver would drive, and the resulting fuel economy, measured in the way that fuel economy is measured, was over 90 miles per gallon. The average fuel economy in a regular Prius is about 45 miles per gallon. So we can talk after about how one measures fuel economy under the federal standards, but that's what was followed. So we think it's pretty good. We think it's pretty good data.
Hello. Just to give you a piece of information, starting next week we will have our own overflow room, because now we have a lot of students just outside. Next week we will have an overflow room. It takes about 100 students. That's the end of the talk for today, and thank you, Dan.
Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience with some very good questions, and best of luck as you move forward in your careers, and keep that triangle in mind of technology, policy, and finance. Thank you.